champagne, some die of thirst. No way of knowing which way it's going. Hope for the best, expect the worst. Hope for the best.
Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Tuesday, September 17th, 2024. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And media commentary columnist and author of the new book, The Extinction of Experience, Being Human in a Disembodied World, Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
So we continue on with the fallout from the second assassination attempt on Donald Trump. I have a post up at commentary.org called, I should know this by heart, The Assassination Wish Fulfillment, since I wrote it. And I want to just go through a little bit of what I say and then ask you guys to respond. I was noticing throughout the day yesterday that the story was twinned with the story of the ongoing troubles in Springfield, Ohio, where the Haitian migrants were accused by J.D. Vance and Donald Trump, some Haitian migrants, of eating domesticated animals last week. And it seemed very clear to me that by putting these two stories together, or let me just give examples of how these two stories were being put together. Norah O'Donnell on the CBS Evening News last night. Donald Trump is blaming Democrats for inflaming political rhetoric, she said, because Trump said, the way you're talking about me is putting me in danger, right? He said that Biden and Harris are putting him in danger. But the former president's own words seem to be increasing the threat of political violence in Springfield, Ohio. That's where a false and ugly accusation against Haitians, thousands of whom are legal permanent residents, is impacting daily life. This morning, on Morning Joe, Mika Brzezinski introduced a report by Garrett Haake about the goings-on yesterday in relation to the briefings about Ryan Routh's assassination attempt, and then immediately blended into a package, or basically a monologue, about all of the times that Trump has called for or has encouraged violence. All of this together, to me, seems to suggest, as well as a Washington Post story that says, the Secret Service told Trump years ago that golfing is not safe and he should not golf because that gives assassins a clear target at him. But nevertheless, he persisted. Mm-hmm. A story clearly put out by the Secret Service to try to deal with its collapsing reputation and the fact that it has become a disgrace to everybody whose eyeballs are on it. Put all these together, you get Trump is asking for it. Trump was asking for it. He's been asking for it. He started it. He encouraged violence. He is asking for it. Most important detail to add in here is that yesterday afternoon, Ohio Governor Mike DeWine, who has been very angry about Trump and Vance retailing these stories about Springfield, Ohio, calling them garbage, announced that according, I guess, to FBI or intelligence or whatever, that there have been 33 threats made to institutions in Springfield, Ohio, schools and the city hall in particular, all of them hoaxes, all of them emanating from abroad by bad actors attempting to interfere with our politics. A fact that was not noted in the Norah O'Donnell coverage yesterday or on during Mika Brzezinski's preposterous monologue, or much of anywhere, as far as I can tell. What is going on here? How are we living in a world in which a guy can be the target of two assassins, one of whom missed him by millimeters, And the story is he talked trash about Haitian migrants and therefore, QED.
Well, I think you get at some of the most important points in your piece. You note this is wish fulfillment for a lot of Democrats. Now, they wouldn't say that in polite company. Of course, if you accuse them of wanting to wish death upon someone, they would be horrified. But it is, if you look at the accumulation of the rhetoric, not just about this most recent attempt, but after the first one, the inability of people whose professional obligation is to report on fact and make sure the public is informed about what's going on are deliberately avoiding doing their jobs because they dislike Donald Trump so much. But I do think from a media standpoint, the most important point is the one you just made. Why are they not reporting this major piece of news from the governor of Ohio, a governor whose statements they were happy to repeat when he was criticizing Donald Trump? It's because it is inconvenient to the narrative. And the narrative is the larger overarching thing here with regard to what's happening in Springfield, Ohio, with regard to the migrant crisis, with regard to Donald Trump. So I think that's part of it. The other interesting thing is that there were a few other data points on the Secret Service that emerged yesterday. One, Donald Trump did say, I need more protection. I need more agents on my detail. He said that outright. He had not said that before, but he has said that. And the Secret Service has got its hat in its hand to Congress this week, asking for a lot more money, saying they need funding. So there
endorsed by Biden yesterday.
Yes,
Biden said
yes.
they need more money.
They need more money.
Yeah,
so,
like they're going to get more money after this.
Well,
good luck to you.
It doesn't matter how much money you throw at a problem if the institutional rot in this particular agency is not fixed and new leadership brought in and houses cleaned, as they say, then I don't think that's going to solve the problem. So there are like behind the scenes funding issues with the Secret Service. I thought that Trump's statement immediately after the attempted assassination, saying, thanking the agents who thwarted it, was good. But he did add that important point, and that's another thing. Both and quite frankly, both Harris and Trump probably need more people on their detail. It's not just that Trump is at risk. With the escalation of the violence and the rhetoric on both sides, maybe we do need to rethink how we protect candidates for president.
And that was the problem also with the what I took away from the Washington Post story was that the Secret Service is doing exactly the wrong thing here by leaking this stuff, right? They should be that presumably they're being told from the top down, keep your traps shut, right? There's no like 50-50 here where like half the country is like, well, I think they've been doing a pretty good job or whatever. Like they are in the dock. And so from the top down, they need to be saying, the last thing you do is leak to the Washington Post that this is the guy's fault, the guy who was shot at's fault. And that sort of tells me there's still this sort of institutional discipline problem within the Secret Service, that they know exactly the wrong thing to do and say, and they keep saying and doing those exact wrong things. They can't stop it from happening. And that is not going to be fixed with money either.
Well, money is not the issue. First of all, we're about to get this report. I thought it was going to be yesterday, but apparently it's today, on the Secret Service's behavior in Butler. And it's not about money. It's about how they deploy their forces. It's not that they don't have enough money to have enough people in Butler, Pennsylvania. Decision was made on the size of the detail that Trump would have on the basis of the understanding that this was all he needed. And they admitted yesterday that they did not cover the golf course. They did not establish a full perimeter around the golf course when he went to golf, which is obviously something they could have done. You don't say, well, we didn't do it. And they could have done it. They didn't do it. And as it happens, somebody who was not in the deterrent, that's to create the deterrent that means that there is no shooter in a sniper blind who gets there at 1:52 a.m., 12 hours before Trump is about to approach to the hole where he might be able to take a shot at him. He just can't get there at all because the perimeter is shut down, or you walk the perimeter. This was a happenstance that somebody had been on the hole ahead of Trump and walked the hole and saw a glisten of the rifle. Had Routh, the would-be assassin, been more circumspect, or had he had the rifle up instead of out or whatever, wouldn't have been seen. And then he would have had his, he might have been able to take a shot. That was another leak, by the way, which is, he wouldn't have had a good sight line anyway. Oh, really? Like,
Huh.
that's really where you want to go there? He wouldn't have had a good sight line?
But
We already had somebody who, a 20-year-old kid with not much experience with guns, nearly blew his head off. So I don't know how good a sight line you need. I know snipers are really talented and they need distance and all of that, but I don't know what kind of
Also, it
sight he had on the
conflicts
gun.
with their other excuse, because their other excuse is that it was dangerous for him to be
Right.
there because there was this sight line where cameras could go on the perimeter and get a good photograph of him. Therefore, it was Trump's fault for being in the spot where cameras and also guns therefore could see. So it's contradicting.
Right. So if they know that this is a spot from which people take photographs of Trump while he's golfing, you would think that somebody who studies the photographs would say, "Oh, that's where I could sit with my gun." So maybe they should be looking at photographs and saying, "There's a spot where someone could sit with a gun. We'll just go stand there for a couple hours or 15 minutes until he passes the hole."
There's another issue that I think you raise very well in your piece, and it speaks to the Morning Joe comment you made, where Brzezinski does this whole montage of all the supposedly violent remarks that Trump made. If I recall correctly, what she said, some of the things she said weren't true. It was find people on both sides. A lot of the stuff that has been debunked is not violent speech by Trump. All put together with stuff that is actually quite incendiary that he has said over the years. And I think the media no longer has any credibility with Americans, including Americans who dislike Trump, when it comes to scolding any politician with regard to violent rhetoric. I mean, if you go back through a lot of Joe Biden's tweets over the last few years, you'll see rhetoric that if you just switch the avatar and it was Donald Trump saying it, would seem quite insightful. But that's never called out, right? That's fine as a defender of democracy.
Inciting. I don't think you want to say insightful.
Sorry. I have not had my second cup of coffee, and it was a late night. But yeah, inciting violent rhetoric. So
let's go back to that, by the way, because let's go to an example from when he was vice president.
Right.
And he said, Mitt Romney, they're going to put you all back in chains, he said to a black audience. Well, what if somebody in that audience is like, oh my God, they're going to put my children in chains. I better go do something about this before they put my children in chains. There are people who are very literal minded, and he said what he said. And, it's like, that's why you're not supposed to say stuff like that.
But this is...
Yes. Go ahead, Abe. Sorry.
This is why I think, to focus on the media point for a second, the pairing of the assassination attempts on Trump with his incendiary language in the past, some of it accurate, some of it made up, as Christine says, this is first and foremost defensive on the media's part. This is their way of saying, hey, we can't say... They're getting the sense that we have gone too far in talking about him as a threat. It is our language that has gotten the country a little crazy, at least contributed to it. And we got to deflect here. And that is absolutely what I'm getting at this. Also, it's interesting that Christine used the term avatar, because I think there's a certain degree, this speaks to some of the themes in your book, actually, Christine. There's a sense in which all these players are avatars. And Trump is not a human being shot at. He is this thing that's out there that pops up on social media that wreaks havoc. He's a meme. He's placed into, dancing memes, and he's this and he's that and he's whatever. He's not a real human being. So I think the whole idea of political assassination, we are at least a layer removed from the ramifications of it in this age in a way that we haven't been before.
Well, there is a guy on Twitter. He now runs this left-wing website blog thing called Midas Touch. His name is Ron Filipowski. And he's a useful follow if you are looking for a useful follow, even though if you are right of center, he will annoy you and make you sick. The way that certain people on the MAGA right are useful follows, because he does a lot of work clipping, finding clips, showing you things, finding interesting, embarrassing things. Like it's good info. But so he quoted a tweet, but this is also what he's like. So he quoted a tweet by Donald Trump Jr. that said, "Why don't you see what it's like to have to go tell your 5 children that somebody just shot at their grandfather for a second time? Why don't you go see what that's like?" So I'm not a fan of Donald Trump Jr.'s, to put it mildly. I think he's a kind of disgraceful public figure, and a net negative for our public life. But that was a kind of a heartfelt thing to say. And Filipowski's response was, "Did you tell your children about how you were stepping out on your fiance?" Because there was a story about how Donald Trump Jr. had been somewhere a month ago with a woman who was not Kimberly Guilfoyle, his fiance, somewhere or other. This guy, his father has just been shot at twice. His father just did subject of a second assassin, or, wasn't shot at the second time. That's where, now he's not MSNBC, right? He is a partisan leftist Democrat. His entire feed is dedicated to trying to defeat Trump and make fun of Trump and make Trump look bad and all of that. But that impulse, that deep impulse to take everything and any emotion that is expressed somewhere that does not conform with your emotional makeup and trash it and crumple it up and throw it in a garbage can and insult somebody who, for once in his life, didn't say something that maybe was particularly controversial, I think is telling. And it's telling because Ryan Routh, in one of his many tweets that we have now read, what phrase did he use 3 or 4 months ago? He said, "Democracy is on the ballot."
Mm-hmm.
That's a Biden phrase. That is an MSNBC phrase. That is a media phrase. Democracy is on the ballot. And the logical extension, which I think is what Abe is saying, the logical extension of the theory that democracy is on the ballot and that this election is central to the future of the country not becoming an authoritarian state, provides the emotional and moral justification for the assassination of Donald Trump. And that's why in my post I say that the implicit message of all of this is that Trump is asking for it. He's golfing where he shouldn't golf. He's talking trash about migrants, so he's upsetting people. What he did to Cheeks in Butler, Pennsylvania, and why he shot at him, he's asking for it. And the reason that they say he's asking for it is because they can't say, which I think is the other point that you're all making, he deserves it. He should be shot. You know what? He should be killed. If he's killed, our future will be better off. And my post says, you people have no idea what you are playing with.
Trump
this is the monkeys.
Yeah. Trump
this is the
said
monkey's
that in his
right.
message.
Yeah. This is the monkey's paw. You remember the story of the monkey's paw? People get this thing where they can make 3 wishes, and each wish becomes more catastrophic than the last, particularly when, totally out of good motive and love and desire, they wish their dead son back to life, and the dead son, is a monstrous, ghoulish, is going to kill everybody.
Well, that's what you said. I mean, I think that's what you were saying in your post when you said they are not horrified, right? I
Right.
mean, that was the thing, which is like you can fake sympathy to a certain degree, but you can't fake horror. Like that's
Yeah.
a natural response that you can see
Yeah.
in someone's eyes when they speak, and like
Yeah.
they can't, like they're not feeling that next level,
Hmm.
horrified feeling of what they
Yeah.
just saw, and you
Yeah.
can't really hide that. And they're trying to talk
Yeah.
their way
But
around
they've
it. But
Yeah.
the truth is that if you're not like shaken by this
Yeah.
kind of thing,
But they've manufactured horror about the end of democracy for so many years now that it's almost as if they can't experience genuine horror at the idea that another an American politician would be shot regardless of whether he has a D or an R after his name. I
Because
was
they
remembering,
want him shot.
right. Well, the New
That's
York
what I'm
Times,
saying. I
yeah,
don't think they
no,
can
exactly.
manufacture horror because there are so many people. I'm not saying the ones that I'm talking about. I'm saying that there are tens of millions of people in this country who would dance a jig to hear that Donald Trump had been assassinated. Now, that may be true, by the way, of Biden. That may be true of any major politician whenever. When Ronald Reagan was nearly killed in 1981, people in my dorm, around my building, 1981, people were like high-fiving each other, although I don't think high fives were a thing then. But I mean, there were people who were happy and thought maybe he had been killed. And there were op-eds published in college newspapers about how he deserved it or whatever. And he had only been president for 7 weeks, by the way. Like he hadn't done evil, horrible things yet. You know what I mean? So this is a deep human impulse whenever you have a political rival, is to think, well, you know what? The cleanest thing would be for him to just vanish. So there are two ways people can vanish. They can, die of natural causes, have a heart attack and die or whatever, or they can be killed. And then if you really want them gone and they're killed.
Or forced out by Nancy Pelosi. That's a third option.
Okay, yeah, right, exactly, right. But look, I mean, when I say
been the story of Trump all along, right? Which is like not necessarily assassination, but sort of even starting from the Republican primaries in 2016, the idea that can't somebody do something? And I don't mean that in a necessarily violent way. I just mean the
25th
theme,
Amendment,
the theme of the 25th Amendment, or so and so needs to run. Or now it's like, well, if only George W. Bush would come out and endorse Kamala, that would. There's the theme of the past near decade has been, isn't there a switch that someone can flip?
Right. And that is an important point because and I say this in the post, I understand this emotion. I do not want Trump here as the Republican nominee. I did not want him to be president in 2016. I did not want him to not accept the results of the election. I wanted him to be impeached and convicted after the January 6th thing. I did not want him running for office. Again, I did not want him winning the primary. All of that, I wished it were otherwise. I wish it were otherwise. I wish everything had been otherwise. I don't wish us to be in this situation where Trump is one nominee and Kamala Harris, who can't even be interviewed by a local station in Philadelphia without making an embarrassing, cringe-inducing fool of herself in a weird preview of what is to come if she becomes president of the United States. She managed to avoid seeming like Selena Meyer in the debate from Veep. And in this interview, she is Selena Meyer. She was Selena Meyer times 2. She was Veep 2, the Veepening. And, I don't want to be in this position, but you wish at your peril, because this country would not survive. When I say won't survive, I mean, do we want civil war? Donald Trump is assassinated by a political opponent. That will be the closest we will come to civil war in 160 years, without question. In 1968, half of cities, Washington, Chicago, various cities, were burned down as a result of the Martin Luther King assassination. So let's not.
And we're at a much lower, compared to that era, we're at a much lower trust in federal government. In particular, Pew just had some numbers out. It's like 22% of Americans trust their government. That's extremely low.
Right. So
also, it's an extraordinary sign of widespread immaturity that the liberal world, the liberal America, can't accept basic reality. I mean, you can hate it, you can protest against it, you can try to change it in constructive ways, but this like frozen temper tantrum that they've been in of just no, I won't, we can't, somehow it has to go. What is that? That's not, I mean, we sit here and we listen to Ilhan Omar, talk about Jews in Israel and Rashida Tlaib, and we're not advocating anything insane.
No, I would like them both to drop dead, though. I mean, but that's not a wish. That's not a real, like, it's like they should drop the famous, it's a Yiddish phrase, they should drop dead. But that means you're not making them drop dead.
Nor would I want anyone to do anything to make them drop dead.
Of course not. Of course
not. That's my point.
But that's the wish fulfillment danger, you see, because if it turned out that we were having these conversations about Ilhan Omar, and then somebody got in a car and drove to Washington and went to a softball game and tried to kill Ilhan Omar, that would be the worst possible, which of course happened in 2017, and Steve Scalise nearly died in such a shooting. That would be the worst possible thing for the things that I hold most dear and most important, which is that American support for Israel remains strong, and that the idea being that that Israel is the civilized player, and that the people who support it are the supporters of civilization as opposed to the supporters of chaos and terrorism. And that would be an act of terrorism, and it would be a monstrous and disastrous thing. So of course I don't wish anything like that to happen. I would say it would be more important that they be protected than other people for precisely this reason.
But this has also upended the longtime left-leaning narrative about domestic terrorism, which is that it's angry right-wing guys picking up guns and going after people, right? The last couple of shooters have not been of the right. They have been, from what we can understand, people who are more sympathetic to candidates on the left. So that also has been, I think, difficult. There's been a cognitive dissonance among the intelligentsia who write about this stuff, having to come to terms with that, because anytime there's been left-wing violence, and this was true in the Antifa riot summer, we were always reminded with all these, statistics that the biggest domestic terror threat isn't all these people, occupying a federal courthouse on the West Coast. It's these angry white guys, these militants, and they do exist. But I think there is, again, an unwillingness to accept that the impulse towards violence, not just the rhetoric, but the actual actionable behavior on the left has grown in recent decades.
We are at some kind of a civilizational crossroads. That's part of the subject of Christine's book, The Extinction of Experience. That crossroads, we can stay at that crossroads for a long time. I don't mean like the light's going to turn red or green and then we're going to head down a road that we can never get off of. But when I say we're at institutional crossroads, it is that the Noah Rothman permission structure for thinking the unthinkable, that's the wish fulfillment part that I'm talking about here, which is think through Mika Brzezinski if you are capable, or Nora O'Donnell if you are capable, or the people who are writing the stories in the Washington Post if you are capable, of what history tells us about when such incidents take place and what they do. I mean, the most obvious example is that World War I, which was the most, in many ways, the most destructive event in world history. Certainly the most costly war in world history, in some reckonings, began by an assassination, right? We've spent 60 years dealing with the Kennedy assassination. Imagine a world in which Ronald Reagan's assassination had been successful. Yes, I suppose if you think that supply-side economics was a terrible thing, that would be fine. 1881, Tsar Alexander II is assassinated. He was a liberalizer, assassinated. His son, Alexander III, becomes a reactionary, retrogressive, creates the conditions over the course of the next 30 some odd years for the Bolshevik takeover of Russia and the horrors into which the world descended in the 20th century as a result of Soviet totalitarianism. You are choosing your own adventure, and none of the paths are good.
Right.
I mean,
And
yeah,
aside from huge, widespread cataclysm here as a result, what does the assassination of a presidential candidate, how does that figure into one's scheme to preserve democracy? What about that? What about this system that is so precious and so fragile and so on the brink of disintegration? What happens to that when we're this close to an election day and a candidate is taken out?
yeah. I mean, well, because that's the question, is the degree to which that talking point is disingenuous,
Right.
and that no one really thinks democracy is on the ballot. I mean,
Right.
I'm sure Ann Applebaum thinks democracy is on the ballot because, I don't know, she's an expert on Ukraine, and suddenly her ability to understand the complexities of the relations between Ukraine and the Soviet Union in the 1920s deserts her when she talks about America, which she writes about as though she's writing 7 Days in May or is writing a non-humorous version of Dr. Strangelove. I'm sure there are people who they don't really think democracy is on the ballot. It's a soundbite. It's a talking point. It's a phrase to use to gin up money and support and terror on your side, so that, as Abe would say, that line that, this is the most important election we've ever had, and everything is so you can get people like their heart beating every time they think about what might happen if your rival wins.
And one of the things that
Democracy,
people
yeah,
say, one of the things that the democracy is on the ballot type people also say, is that they talk a lot about they say things like, if I were a foreign correspondent covering this country the way that American reporters cover foreign countries, what would I say about Trump and all this stuff, right? That's a common line. Like if I were covering this, but this were taking place, in Kazakhstan or something, I would have a very easy time saying, well, this guy is a wannabe dictator and, all that stuff. But now is also a good time to say, if you were covering this in some other country and one of the nominees was just shot at twice, how would you cover that? It doesn't all go in one direction. The whole this is clearly Banana Republic stuff. If you could just take a step back, is always sort of focused on what Trump is doing and what Trump represents. But, we're getting into that kind of chaotic situation with this, where people just keep taking shots at one of the major nominees with a couple months to go before the election.
It also shows a real distrust of not just our institutions. I understand the distrust of institutions, many of which have failed and lied to the American people. So that distrust, in a way, has been earned. It's Constitution Day. Today's Constitution Day. We're supposed to be celebrating our Constitution, which is and remains an incredible document. And I feel like a lot of the rhetoric of the democracy in danger. I mean, it was 2021. There was a New York Times headline that will this be the end of democracy or something? Or will 2024 be the year democracy ends? It shows an absolute lack of mistrust in the document that started our whole experiment here. And we know that there's a lot of distrust because we know there are a fair number of people on the left who want to, radically alter the Supreme Court because they're not getting the decisions they want. They want to radically change, the way the Electoral College works. So there's a disrespect, I think, that comes out in that sort of attack on the Constitution. So when they're talking about democracy, they're talking about their side winning elections. They're actually not talking about democracy. If they were, they'd have a healthier respect for our Constitution.
This is where the talk about the 2020 Trump's refusal to concede in 2020 and everything that happened in the 2 months after it, I find very upsetting. As listeners will know, as I said before, I think Trump's conduct was disgraceful. I think he should have been impeached and convicted for his conduct, for encouraging the riot at the Capitol, which I believe he did. the story of the 2020 election is a story of the thickness and richness and complexity of this country, saving this country from a very potentially bad outcome. Because the story of 2020 was the utter failure of Trump and his forces to marshal the tools of power to keep him in power, not his success at it. Right?
The system
62
won,
court
yes.
cases that he lost every one of. No, there was not a single slate of electors recognized and sent to the cap. By the way, that had happened in the United States in 1948. Different sets of electors were sent to the Capitol in 1948. And I think later also, maybe even I can't remember when. But segregationists were playing this games with sending separate sets of electors. That didn't happen. Pence didn't. And Pence said, I don't even have a modality if I wanted to do what the president wants me to do. I don't even have a method of which to do it. There's nothing that says I have any ability not to accept the box with the elector ballots in it. It's not like, okay, you're there. I'm there to accept the box. I'm not there to say I'm not accepting the box. There's nothing anywhere that says I can even do that. We have thousands of elective offices aside from the presidency. We have hundreds of elective offices in Washington aside from the presidency. And every effort that I know about that is an effort to simplify, streamline, and make this process less thick is a liberal and leftist effort. The empowerment of the imperial presidency is not until Donald Trump said, well, okay, if you're going to do this, I'm going to do this, pretty much. The empowerment of the imperial presidency is a democratic party and liberal leftist.
Schlesinger wrote a book about it, like 30 years ago, the imperial presidency.
They want to center power in the president. That is their effort. Or Woodrow Wilson, that's the progressive concept. This is their rodeo. And as you say, they don't want an electoral college. They don't want, they want the Supreme Court to be packed or whatever, all of that. Again, monkey's paw. Like, let's see how you like it. By the way, let's see how you like it. This is why I mentioned, don't even go into this in scenarios, but when you start an era of assassinations, it doesn't stop. So you get JFK, then you get RFK, you get Martin Luther King, you get RFK, you get George Wallace, crippled by assassin's bullet. You get 2 assassination attempts on Gerald Ford. You get the kidnapping and murder of the Italian Prime Minister Adolfo Moro in 1979. You get Reagan and John Paul II nearly killed both within 3 weeks of each other, at which point, after 18 years of this frenzy of assassinations, somehow the world spat out no more. I don't know how it happened. I don't really understand it. It was a generation of
Thatcher in that era too. Thatcher in that era too.
An effort to blow her up at Blackpool. That's right, at the Conservative Party conference at Blackpool. The Earl Mountbatten blown up in India. I mean, it was constant. The last serious assassination on the planet, I think, was Yitzhak Rabin in 1995. Like, this is not a thing. You want to make it a
Abe
thing?
in Japan?
Yeah.
Oh, Abe, I'm sorry. That's right. I mean, so it'll never end. I mean, assassination is the oldest political act in the book. What is a Shakespeare play without somebody killing a king? Or a Christopher Marlowe play without somebody killing a king. But so it's the oldest game in the book. But you want to start in with Trump getting shot? Let's see how you like it when Harris gets shot in the middle of her set. Let's see what happens when a governor gets shot from walking around. Let's see what happens when it starts and it doesn't end. And that's why it has to be ended now, here, right now. And this rhetoric and logic that is being used by the mainstream media is going to get an era of assassination started again, because it creates the permission structure for people to be assassins. But it says you are worthy if you are an assassin.
It's worse than that, because it's not just rhetoric now. It's not just kind of partisan rhetoric. It's trying to normalize the motive for assassination when the person who you dislike politically is actually succeeding at doing this kind of unbelievable thing, which is to come back from a crushing defeat, being booted out of office by the American people, to come back and say, yeah, I'm going to do this again. I'm trying this again. But that normalization of motive is the thing that really disturbs me. Right. And it is, I know people were joking. It's not really it's very dark humor if it's a joke, but saying, oh, Trump's skirt was too short. This is a reference to the idea that if a woman is raped, she brought it on herself if she was dressed a certain way or behaving a certain way or acting a certain way. But there is an attempt to normalize motive here. And that is very worrisome, because it's kind of consistent across many media institutions right now, not just the far left MSNBC talking heads, but
that's an excellent point. That's an excellent point, because isn't that what we've seen with the protesters have a point in Chicago?
That's right.
Protesters have a point. You are supporting a group that murders and wounds 5,000 people in a single morning in Israel on October 7th, and we are heading toward October 7th with the most horrifying transvaluation of values I've ever seen, in which somehow October 7th is going to be converted by pro-Hamas forces into a day of mourning and celebration of their cause and not of the slaughter of Israelis. That's the normalization too. The normalization of radical anti-Semitic activity. We have just been informed that Russell Rickford, the professor at Cornell, who professed himself exhilarated by the murder and injury of 5,000 of my people and our people, is back teaching at Cornell, having taken a voluntary leave and having had no reprimand whatsoever, including, by the way, like Cornell could have given him $1 million to go away on the grounds that maybe they can't get rid of him as a tenured professor, but his presence on campus is so uniquely destructive that out of whatever billions of dollars they have in their endowment, they could buy him off to get him the hell out of Ithaca, because that person should not be on campus exhilarated by the murder of Jews when there are thousands of Jews wandering around Cornell trying to get to class and having their dining hall nearly, threatened with having been blown up just last October. And that's a thing Cornell didn't do. And that is a thing, again, normalization of radical, nihilistic mass violence and the support of mass violence in the place that is supposed to be the progenitor and the defender and the holder of the traditions of civilization.
Well, that's where it is the slow boil begins, right? The normalization language then becomes a kind of tacit acceptance, which, when partnered with no consequences, whether criminal justice consequences or as you say, what should have been shame on Cornell, shame on them. They should get rid of this guy. He should lose his position there. But by not doing those things, it makes it more. It makes it easier for future radicals to come through and say, well, here's an example of how you should treat me too.
Let's do a little raw, naked punditry, as Jonah Goldberg, who was supposed to be on the podcast tomorrow, by the way, would say, raw punditry. So we are now getting a sheaf of polls in, all taken post-debate, all over the place, high quality polls, and clearly any delusion that people might have had that Trump didn't lose the debate or Harris wasn't helped by the debate should be now laid to rest. Every poll shows a measurable bump for Harris, nationally at least. Some of them pretty significant. I mean, 2 or 3 points, 4 points, something like that. Closer in the battleground states, to the extent that you can measure those. Still a razor thin election, but I do think that, Trump did himself no favors last week. And this is the other point about the, they're eating the dogs stuff is it didn't work. Like we had a conversation last week about whether this was smart because it would be a slow acting way of keeping the thing in the news. It didn't work. Like something like 21% of people said that hearing that made them less likely to vote for Trump, and nobody said that it made them more likely to vote for Trump. And they couldn't stop because, of course, anything he does, he has to then double down on because otherwise it would be the admission of error. And Roy Cohn told him 50 years ago, you should never say you were sorry about anything. Anybody have any thoughts about this? Matt's not here, so he's usually the one who perorates on these numbers.
But the poll. Well, the thing about the polls and all of this, and our friend Mark Halpern in his newsletter has been, I think, very consistently reminding readers of this. They're baffling because they're very close, but also because we're not sure of the reasons why undecided voters or independent voters in some of these key states, what their motivation is. Like, what are they seeing? Because it's clear that the Trump ceiling, which we've talked about many times, but Kamala Harris remains a weird sort of sphinx to those voters as well. Now, we have a take on her. We think we understand where she's coming from. But I think a lot of voters found much of that convention appealing. She's certainly a contrast, both generationally and tonally from Donald Trump. And they were, and they saw the excitement of Democratic voters rushing back home to a better candidate. But they are still unsettled by her. And that's why her media appearance is the local media appearance you mentioned earlier, John, and the one she'll do today with the National Association of Black Journalists, those matter because they're events in her campaign because she does them so rarely. So I think the unsettled feeling, the uncertainty people have about Harris won't necessarily translate in the polls, but we will obviously see it on election day. But I think that's the uneasiness of people reading too much into some of these recent polls.
It just means that this is more a warning shot to the right than it is like something that should make the left thrilled, which is he did really badly. Don't pretend otherwise. Like there's no point in going along with this. Stop. I would say if you want Trump to win, stop using your megaphone to enhance the story that animals were being eaten in Ohio, because it's not helping. So if you want to help your guy, even if he says the way you helped me is to talk about how we're creating stories that, as J.D. Vance said, I'll create a story to try to create a narrative that I need people to be talking about migrants. Plenty of people were talking about migrants before. It's the number 2 issue in the country. They didn't need amplification help here. This wasn't like it was the number 11 story and they really needed to move up on the charts. It's already number 2, with a bullet. So, thanks a lot.
And there were real scandalous news stories about migrant crime.
Yeah,
that you didn't need to go somewhere else.
Yeah, well, he did. Trump did that border speech that was an almost cartoonish event because, and we talked about it on the pod at the time, which was he went to the border with families of people who had been killed by illegal immigrants, and the mothers, grieving mothers, were standing behind him, and he stepped up to the microphone, and he said, it's a really sad time in this country right now. The president just got pushed aside, and it's unfair, and he went into it was like a minute and a half rambling about Biden, about what they're doing to Biden and how he ended up against Kamala, right? And it really was, I remember counting, it was like close to 90 seconds. It was the whole beginning from the first words of his thing. And you just sat there going like, what's happening here? But behind him, right, the staging of it was correct. He was at the border. He was at a fence. He had the families, right? And I think they're sort of looking at what else they can do and say, precisely because this issue, they did succeed not in this time, but in the past and through the past, decade or so of bringing immigration to this number 2 spot on concerns. It's there. It's like, what else can you do? Maybe we'll tell them they're eating dogs. How do you get it to number 1?
Yeah.
Do you still think there's going to be more debates?
Yes. because the race is frozen. And I don't see how it gets unfrozen. And now here's one of the reasons I think there are going to be more debates. The interview with her on, was it Philadelphia? With Pittsburgh? Philadelphia. Okay. So, in her convention speech, in her introductory speech, she said, I'm a child of the middle class, love small business, I want to help people. Blah, blah, blah. In her convention speech, she said, I'm a child of the middle class. My mother had a friend. She was a small businesswoman. I love small business people. Donald Trump doesn't like abortion. Yeah. In her debate, she said, I'm a child of the middle class. I love my mother, my second mother. She was a small business person. Donald Trump says this about abortion. And then she gave then with Dana Bash, she said, I'm a child of the middle class. And then she did she is like locked. It's like she's lip syncing to the 45.
You know, the best.
You remember people, you would go on American Bandstand. Now I'm dating myself again as an old man. Go on American Bandstand with Dick Clark. And one of the reasons it was fun to watch is that they didn't perform live. They just lip synced to the 45, which you knew if they performed live, they would have sounded a little different. Then you would have gone, oh, I don't like that. I want to hear the phrasing the way I want to like it. Seth loves live concerts. I don't, because I want to hear the 45. She is now, but now it's really not. She's like a one-hit wonder, and she's gone into, now we're just hearing the same single.
She's becoming a parody of herself. Every answer
parody, right?
Parrot.
So she needs new material. She can't go. I'm sorry, she can't go on like this for 50 days. The very thing that you cite Mark's newsletter saying is the idea that she's too liberal has purchase, because she's not saying anything to change the impression that she's too liberal. And since she says the same things over and over and over again, she's not changing any perceptions of her in her favor. All she's doing is solidifying Democratic support for her.
But this is where I think the gamble that they took on her, and it kind of worked through the convention, but I don't think it works now. And you're right, there's too long a stretch before the end of the game, is that she wouldn't have to do the specifics. She wouldn't have to really defend Biden's policies, because she would talk about her values. And that's why she keeps repeating, I'm from the middle class. It has become a meme now online where someone says, honey, will you clean out the garage? And she says, as a person who grew up middle class, I can't really do that for you. But she really has doubled down on that, and she's very consistent and disciplined in the few interviews she's given by sticking to, you don't need to know specifics because you know my values. Well, I don't think that is enough for people, and
we don't know her
especially
values.
This interview with the Black journalists, like, how's she gonna, there've been these several occasions now where she changes her tone and people say, oh, the code shifting is normal, this is just white people don't understand. Maybe. Yeah, but a lot of voters don't understand it either, and she's doing, either she should explain that this is, enlighten us with how this is a normal thing or not, but she just seems to be pandering. So whether she panders with the journalists today, whether she gives specifics, it will be interesting to watch. There's a friendly crowd for her, very friendly. Trump bombed with this group, so
okay, but
we'll see.
Trump still isn't saying yes.
He'll say yes the minute the minute that they.
Yes.
Or he'll issue a proposal or something. I mean, I don't know. Maybe he shouldn't do one. I have no idea, because he, of course, does badly in the debates. But I cannot. There is something in me that resists the possibility that that what we saw there is the last time we're going to see them in proximity to each other between now and the election. The election is too close. Things are too weird. He is a weird candidate. He is now a weirder candidate because of the assassination attempts. The weirdness of her candidacy is going to come into starker relief during the month of October if she continues to be this utterly vapid vapor of a candidate. It is going to start unnerving people that she says nothing. I mean, she is we mentioned it before, and maybe this will be our commentary recommends right now, which is the movie Being There from 1979, based on the novel by Jerzy Kosinski, directed by Hal Ashby, starring Peter Sellers.
I was supposed to get to do my recommendation today.
Oh, okay. Well, then I didn't remember that. So, but I'm just saying, she is Chauncey the gardener. She is Chauncey Gardner. She is saying things like, we should all tend our garden. And everyone's going, my God, she's so great. And then, yeah, he gets away with it because it's satire. But at some point, they're going to be like, what the hell does she mean? And then it's going to be like, you know what? Maybe she's not really middle class. Her mother was a cancer researcher at McGill University in Montreal, Canada, where she spent her teenage years. And by the way, I looked both at her autobiography and at the worshipful book published about her in 2019 called Kamala's Way. And for the fact that she spent 7 years in Montreal, there's one paragraph in her memoir. And she goes right from San Francisco to Howard University, and nothing about the fact that she grew up in Canada. Now, I'm not saying that it matters that she grew up in Canada, but like some point it's gonna be like, what did she do in Canada? Has anyone gone to interview her classmates from high school in Canada?
Why? Who is she? Mitt Romney?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's.
There's gonna somebody.
I'm just saying, if you don't feed the informational beast, people are going to have to go out and find things to talk about with her.
But that's the thing, is that the instinct in the media is not to do that. The instinct in the media, right? With Romney, we knew that he cut someone's hair. With Rick Perry, we knew that he lived near a very racist rock around.
The rock.
Right? There was like there was a series of these stories that were like, well, that's clearly the best they could do. And I think that we all said at the time something to the effect of, this is what happens when you send somebody, when somebody gets a beat on an investigative story, and it doesn't really pan out, but they've put so much into it that they want to at least publish whatever they have. Right. But there, you see, the instinct is exactly the opposite with that. With Republicans, like, if it's just a rock, then we'll publish the rock, whatever we have. And with her, it's like, no, we don't publish whatever we have. We don't even go looking to see what we have. And that doesn't even necessarily mean that they're
September
covering something
17th. Up. It is September 17th. The election is not till November 5th. She can't say the same things this way. Now, if she were talking policy, I think she kind of could. Like, George W. Bush in 2000 focused on 4 major policy items, but they were substantive discussion points that he was trying to put over, saying, if I'm president, here's how I'm going to be different, particularly on education. I have this plan with this thing, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. It's no child left behind, and we're going to have standards, and we're going to have testing, and we're going to blah, 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 right? So that was substantive, but focused. This is, my values. And at some point, it's like, what values do we know? I don't know what her values are. What does that even mean? What does it even mean that she has values?
She wants to get us back to where the values of the American people really lie. That's the
which are the values of the her values are the values of valuing values of valuations. I don't know. I know. That's why, yes, I think there will be more debates.
Okay.
I could be wrong.
The first debate can't repeat itself exactly also, which is why Trump should want it, because it's like, you can't, what's she going to do? Memorize that performance and do it again? She's not going to have the same moderators. She's not going to have the same questions. Like he should have the same
questions fed to her in advance, right? As the affidavit that the ABC worker revealed.
Where did that story go?
I don't know, because we don't. First of all, it's a weird story. The story we're talking about here is that somebody issued an affidavit, had it notarized on the day before the debate on September 9th, working at ABC, saying ABC is essentially colluding with the Harris campaign. They changed the podium. They didn't give her the exact questions, but they gave her sort of the direction. ABC is very biased. I've been working here for 10 years. It's very biased. Sincerely, but the name of the person who gave the affidavit is blacked out, as is the name of the notary. And so we don't know who this is, what this is. And, if somebody were really, Ben Shapiro, my friend Ben Shapiro, should offer this guy $1 million or whoever, or this woman $1 million, and offer him a job to work at the Daily Wire to come out and testify or something. Like, somebody ought to do that if someone's gonna, Chris Rufo offered like $5,000 for someone to prove that they were eating cats in Springfield, Ohio, which is really a great use of nonprofit taxpayer money. But
this is where Andrew Breitbart would this was his thing. That was his lane.
Right, exactly. Anyway, I don't know. So, but that story is very odd because ABC, as far as I know, has not said this affidavit is false. By the way, they're just letting it lie. I know. Yeah. Anyway, okay. So now we're really going far field. Christine, you have a recommends, and you're not going to be here tomorrow. So I don't want to.
Don't step on my moment, John.
Okay.
No, I'm as you all know, I love speculative fiction, and I'm still on my Japanese fiction moratorium because I heard the complaints. I've taken them on board, but I did read this is not Japanese. A friend actually sent me a new work of speculative fiction called Loneliness and Company. It's a novel by Charlie Dyroff. I am almost done with it. It's in some ways uneven, but in many ways really, really fascinating. It's dystopian, but it's a near future that I think a lot of us can recognize. The problem of loneliness has supposedly been removed from what's called the emotional index. They've gotten rid of loneliness, but it turns out people are still suffering from it. So this very ambitious young woman is hired by what she thinks is a company to figure out why people are lonely and to create an AI type program of that becomes a friend to these lonely people to treat loneliness. So as you can see, obviously this book is goes straight to a lot of my nonfiction concerns, but it's very well written. She has a very light touch. She's a wonderful writer. I would say it's uneven in the sense that it can be quite heavy-handed on the anti-technology part, which generally I am sympathetic to, but in fiction I like a lighter touch with that. But I think if you're it also has a really fascinating portrait of New York City because everyone's left New York. It's a city that nobody wants to live in, and she's returned to New York to do this odd job, which spins into no spoilers, but it spins into something that turns out not to be what it seems. But it gives a kind of interesting dystopian look at New York. So if you're a New Yorker, you might find that interesting. But I read it in like half a day. I'm almost done with them. I finished it on the airplane tomorrow. But it's worth, if you like speculative fiction, it's a new entry in that genre of new speculative fiction writers. Loneliness and Company by Charlie Dyroff, Dyroff, and that's my recommendation.
Okay. Fantastic. Well, we'll be back tomorrow. For Christine, Abe, and Seth, I'm John Pupwartz. Keep the candle burning.